Welcome, everyone. I guess we'll go ahead and get started. It's 11:03 a.m. and we want to make sure we have a lot of time with our author panel today. This is the I'm Not Bad, I'm Just Written That Way session. And we have a few little housekeeping details we need to take care of before we begin. First, if you have a question for our panel, please put it in the chat. Second of all, if you can remain muted during our session, that would be fabulous. So we have minimal background noise. If you have connectivity issues, please just make sure that your camera is off. Sometimes that helps. And lastly, this session is being recorded. Okay. We are excited to have 3 guest authors with us today. Our first author is a huge Disney fan, loves Chihuahuas, and has interviewed celebrities like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Justin Timberlake, and Zac Efron. She has written many books for teen and middle grade readers, touching on topics like friendship, first love, and bullying. Some of her latest work has asked the age-old question, what if things had been different? Please welcome Jen Calonita.
Hi, everyone.
Our second author is inspired by classic teen movies like The Breakfast Club and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. She wrote as a child, stopped in high school, and was inspired to begin again after reading The Hunger Games. She's naturally drawn to dark secrets and their power. Her books have been described as twisty and unpredictable mysteries. Please welcome Karen M. McManus.
Hi, everyone.
And our third author today loves yoga, hiking, cooking, and her dog. She grew up in California and New York, has been inspired by Twitter posts, fairy tales.
We are live and running and going and
New Yorker articles. And I'm going to ask TBF, thank you, TBF. Her books frequently include themes like fitting in, friendship, and self-acceptance. Please welcome Alyssa Sheinmel.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you. What we're going to do today is ask a few questions and give our authors a chance to share their comments and also raise questions from any of you. Again, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. First of all, this is the session about I am bad, I'm not bad, I'm just written that way. And so I guess I'd like to ask you a question. Has your mood ever impacted the way that you write a particular character? Alyssa, would you like to start us out?
I don't know if my mood necessarily impacts the way I write a particular character. I think, while I'm writing the character, particularly when I'm in the first person, I kind of get into their mood. So it depends on the mood that my characters are in. But I definitely think my mood will impact the ideas that I get. Like if I'm feeling, righteously indignant about something, I often want to write about the thing that I'm feeling righteously indignant about. And that can turn into a story idea.
Jen, how about you?
I'll say with Go the Distance, my Hercules book, I was writing it when we first locked down last March during COVID, and I was spending all this time in the underworld. So even more than just my characters, it was just this like mood. It was, dark, it was scary, it was, very confusing. So in a way, it was nice to have that escape into that world, but it definitely set a certain tone.
You can see how that would happen. COVID set a tone for lots of people's lives. Karen.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm a pretty linear writer. I, have to write in order. I write multi-POV, so it's one character, then another character, then another character. So I kind of, can't let myself get swayed by the mood that I'm in, because that might not serve the character I'm writing at that moment. So what I try to do is get inside their head and get inside whatever it is I think they need to be experiencing for that particular scene, and then just write it.
So it would seem that you jump around in your feelings and your points of view. That must be difficult to keep track of.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time planning who my characters are, and then I have certain tricks to get into their headspace, like listening to playlists that's just for them. So that's what I tend to do to make sure that I can hopefully get that voice right.
Alyssa, do you find that you're a linear writer as well?
I am. I'm very linear. I'm exactly like Karen said. I need to write my books in order, and I do bounce around with multiple POVs also. But I tend to write, my chapters in order. I also am an outliner, so I, have everything kind of written out in order. And I'll certainly like go back and fix things later, but I do that first draft. I have to do in order.
Jen, are you as well a linear writer?
I would say I'm like Karen and Alyssa that way. I have to write in order. I am always impressed when I meet those authors who talk about writing one POV straight through the story and then they go back to do the others. I don't think I could manage that. And I also do outline. I swear by the outline. I like to plot on Post-it notes so I can see like a visual roadmap when I'm working, and that does help me, but I have to go in order.
You mentioned Post-it notes, and at one point I was on an interview with Steve Schenken, and he shared his wall behind him, which had lots of, it also had an idea wall with Post-its. Karen, is that something that you do?
I don't do Post-its. I do outline. I use an Excel spreadsheet because I just like to toggle between my Word document and that, and I just start with kind of like the bare beats of the story. Here's the inciting incident. Here's about where we have to be in the middle. Here's where I want to end up. And it gets a lot more detailed as I go along. And I tend to also include an area for key character moments. So as the plot is progressing and unfolding, hopefully the characters are also like developing and going on their own parallel journeys.
Alyssa?
I outline just in Microsoft Word with bullet points. So again, it's that same linear thing where I like to be able to write it all out. And, I don't know about you guys, but outlining is something that once I usually dread ahead of time, and then once I'm actually doing it, usually knock wood goes okay. But I think part of what makes it go okay is that it feels, for me at least, that it's in a Word document, it just feels like writing. I'm just telling the story, but for my own benefit in that case.
Are your villain characters based on people that you know? Jen, would you like to start us off?
Well, I mean, I would say for the last few years, my villain characters are all based on fairy tale villains, whether, in the Fairy Tale Reform School series, like based on classic fairy tales, or in the Disney Twisted Tale books, they're based on movie villains from the animated films. So I have this like great source material when I'm working on the Disney ones, because like for Hades, like I had like James Woods' voice. He voices Hades in Hercules. I just had his voice in my head the whole time I was writing, which was kind of fun.
Karen?
I feel like that would be dangerous to base villains on real people, but I do, pull little bits and pieces, not necessarily from people, but from experiences, and in particular, the kind of emotional reaction that I want my characters to have, my main characters to have to their antagonist, who may be a flat out villain or may just be somebody who wants something different than what they want. Is, what I try to get across is, how did I feel in high school when, somebody dismissed me, or, somebody took something that I wanted. And so I try to pull from that.
How about you, Alyssa?
I don't think my villain. I actually don't really think of any of my characters as villains, like even the ones who are like, not particularly likable or problematic. I just think of them as complicated. But they're not based on anyone. None of my characters are based on people from real life. They all have bits and pieces, like Karen said, I take from experiences, but I don't think any of my characters are based on real people.
So you mentioned having the voice of someone in your head, Jen, James Wood. And I know when I listen to an audiobook, even if I later on switch to reading the next book or later in the book in print format, the narrator of the audiobook is stuck in my head. So do you find that having a voice in your head helps you develop a character?
I mean, like Karen said before, depending on what you're writing, like you do want to get into that character's headspace and be looking at the story from their point of view. In a way, like maybe it's cheating a little bit with the Disney books, because I do have that source material, and So, you know, I can easily identify character traits and their voice. And so, you know, I just finished a book on Flynn Rider, and, you know, it was really fun to have that character's voice in my head for a while. But when it's original characters, I think I just more concentrate on, you know, who they are, where they're coming into the story, where they're coming from, and just what their point of view is.
Karen?
Sorry, what was the question?
Do you have a voice? You mentioned that you have a playlist that you
Yes.
sometimes use to inform your characters. Does that include, do you have a voice in your head at all?
Oh, no, I don't think so. I do, like I said, I spend a lot of time on character work, you know, and one of the big things I think about is how are these characters going to sound different from each other? Because I do usually have 3 to 4 of them. And it's a problem if the reader is, you know, can't tell who's speaking. So sometimes I think of voice in more of a technical way, and that I think I need to give them like little phrases that they say and that only they say, you know, or I need to give them sentence patterns. This character may speak in short, sharp, choppy sentences. This character might have a big vocabulary, like that type of thing. But what I'm really thinking about as I write is like, what do they want? Like, what are they hiding, you know, and what's going to happen when that comes out?
Secrets, as it is.
Yes, yeah, I like secrets.
Alyssa, I know in R.I.P. Eliza Hart, you mentioned also at one point how the different voices in that text, you had to get in the vocal patterns or the thinking patterns of those 2 characters were also part of it.
Yeah, I've written a few books with multiple POVs like Karen, and I think, you know, similarly, I want it to feel like if you open to a random page and you're familiar with, you can be able to tell which character is speaking just from a random paragraph. And so I think I like to, you know, for me, because I'm a bit of a grammar nerd, I tend to give them different grammatical tips. Like I'll have, you know, some characters who speak in run-on sentences, maybe lots of parentheses and asides, and other characters, like Karen was saying, very choppy, short sentences. And for me, like, writing that is actually really fun because it allows me to bounce from one voice to another. But you know, it's really getting that voice stuck in my head. I don't actually listen to music while I'm writing. I find I get the, you know, musician's voice stuck in my head, and the voice that I need stuck in my head, the song I need in my head is that character's voice.
How do you build a backstory for someone? You've mentioned that you keep the notes in Excel or in Word, but do you really fully think through this person's full backstory in order to inform what you write, Jen?
You know, I think it does help, you know, to know as much about the character you're writing as you can. And I remember an author friend saying this years ago, and I do tend to do this when I'm starting to create a character, like spend a day with this new character where they come with you everywhere. You know, from the moment you wake up, would they have coffee? Are they going to school? Do they have a job? Are they, you know, where are they in the world? And then just like spending the whole day with them, thinking about every detail. And obviously, a lot of those details may not even come into your story, but I feel like the more real they become, the easier it is to anticipate what they might say, what they might do, how they might react to a situation. So I do use that technique when I can.
That's an interesting thought. I'm thinking about actors who are in their role for the period of the shooting. It feels very much like that, what you're saying. Karen?
I do a lot of planning for my characters. So I almost interview them and ask them lots of questions about like what's their house look like and what's their favorite subject in school and what's their favorite food. And a lot of it doesn't make it into the book because there's not room for that kind of detail, but it does help me have a clearer picture of who they are. You know, it informs the way that I write about them. But the big thing is like, what do they want and what are they hiding? And that pretty much drives every character that I write in some way. And as long as I know that, I feel like I can get them where they need to go. And you know, I want them to grow over time. So I want to know, like, where did they start in the beginning? And in that last chapter, you know, for good or for bad, are they doing something that might have seemed impossible in that first chapter? And if they have, then I'll feel like, you know, I probably took them on the journey I wanted them to go on.
Alyssa?
I don't know if I always know my character's entire background before I start writing. It varies from book to book and character to character. Sometimes the only way I can get to know the character's background, like I tend to write, not always, but I often write like the first 5 or 10 chapters of a book before I've worked out a lot of those details, because that's just me playing with the voice. And maybe all of those characters will get trashed, all those chapters rather will get trashed, but it's my kind of getting to know the character the same way, Jen was talking about spending the day with them, or Karen was talking about interviewing them. I think that's my way of getting to know them, is by writing those first 3 chapters, and that, by sometimes again the chapters get trashed, but that's how I get to know them.
Got a question. Do you have endpoints you want the characters to end at, or do you let them develop in your own throughout? And that's kind of what you're referring to, Alyssa.
I mean, as far as the endpoint, like I said, I do tend to outline, so I usually know, what their arc is going to be, and what, what the events of the story are going to be, and how I'm hoping that their character will develop. But sometimes, once I'm actually writing on the page, I'm like, whatever, emotional arc I thought that it was going to be does not feel quite right, and it does shift for sure.
Give us a sense of your writing day. Do you sit down at your desk in the morning and write straight through to 3 p.m.? Do you take a break? How does your day look as a writer? Karen, would you start us off?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on whether or not I'm on deadline. Like, do I have something due to my editor, and how soon? When I'm in the throes of drafting something, I will write like all day long, 12 hours, forget to eat type of thing, late into the night. And I can do that for long chunks of time and get a book drafted in like a month to 2 months if I'm really in the zone. But when I'm not doing that, like really intense creative part, the day can look different. I'm a nighttime person, so a lot of times I wake up in the morning and I do administrative stuff. I answer emails, I do some marketing things, I'll take pictures of books so that I can post them later because the light's good. And I don't necessarily write every day. But when I'm in the thick of a book, I will write kind of nonstop.
Alyssa, what's your practice?
I mean, well, like Karen, it definitely shifts based on whether or not I'm on deadline. That definitely has an impact. But I'm actually a morning person, so I tend to get most of my writing done in the morning, and the afternoon is when I'll do more administrative stuff. And also when I do a lot of like research and things, it's usually in the afternoons I can set aside time to read and do research. But mornings are my key writing time. Like I know if I haven't had a good writing day by 12 or 12:30, I'm probably not going to have a good writing day.
And at that point, would you just bail, do something else, and then come back?
I think that's the nice thing about like using my afternoons for other sort of work, like doing research or answering emails, and like sometimes not at all, and just like doing yoga or taking a walk and saying, okay, this day was the wash. Like, I think again, it depends on if I'm on deadline and what my responsibilities are. But sometimes I do have to like get up and move in a way that is not reading or writing.
How about you, Jen? What's your day like as a writer?
I mean, like Karen and Alyssa said, like if you're on deadline, like all bets are off. That the writing has to come first, and you're really in the thick of things. But I think when I started as a writer, I didn't realize how many different hats you really wore, and that administrative stuff takes a lot of time. The answering the emails, doing the social media posts, taking those pictures. Oh my gosh, I recently joined TikTok and I still find I'm like, I don't know what's working. I don't know what's not. I mean, so there's a lot of other stuff you do other than the writing. But I will say that I write best in the morning and early afternoon. I do have 2 kids who were home for part of the year virtually. So that definitely complicated things because I usually like to write while the house is quiet. But for the most part, I write best in the morning and early afternoon. And then like Alyssa and Karen said, I might do like some administrative stuff and all those posts.
So you just mentioned COVID, and I know that COVID for a lot of people has really changed the way we think. It's changed the way we live. It's changed the way we relate to other people. Has COVID had any impact at all on either the things that you write, the people you write, ideas for projects, for books? Karen, do you have any thoughts on COVID?
Sorry, I froze for a tiny bit. And I didn't know if you were talking to me. For me, when COVID started, I had just gotten back an edit letter for my 5th book, You'll Be the Death of Me, which is coming out in November. And I was really happy that I had already created that universe and I knew those characters, because it was kind of hard to concentrate, but that was a familiar world. And so I was able to do that, and I was feeling really good about being productive. And then I had to start on my 6th book, and I really did struggle with being able to focus. And that book took me probably the longest of any book.
Could sense that lots of people are struggling with focus during COVID. Alyssa, how about you? COVID impact?
I mean, absolutely. I completely agree with Karen. I was very lucky to be in edits of my book, The Castle School, that came out this past March when COVID started. So that was a world I already knew, but it was just this strange thing, because I know not all writers work from home, but I'm somebody who, already works from home every day, and I don't have kids, and so the only major change was my husband was also working from home, but we were pretty good about not being too much on each other's toes. So it was really remarkable how, even though technically my schedule didn't change, the way everything did change, of course. And so it was harder to be creative and fresh every day and come up with a new idea, because we were all starting from a place of, especially in the early days, we were all in such a state of panic and everything. We didn't know what to expect from one day to the next. So even though technically my routine wasn't that different, like I, got up and sat at my desk every day the same way I did pre-COVID, everything was different. And so it absolutely affected my writing life, for sure. It affected every part of all of our lives,
Yeah, your emotional state, in a way, right? At least my emotional state was different last year. Jen, how about you?
I think, like Karen and Alyssa, I was very thankful that I was already in the middle of Go the Distance when everything started locking down, because like Karen said too, the book that I have coming out next year that hasn't been announced yet, I've never had such a hard time drafting and getting through the first 2 drafts of a book. I feel like I lost steam the longer we went on during COVID. So that was difficult. And then another thing I found so interesting was, when you were writing and you're writing certain scenes in a book where it's a crowded place or somebody's hugging or touching or holding hands, I was like, ooh, is this going to be okay in the book? Like in a year from now, are we pretending this doesn't exist? Like, I know it depends on every story, but it felt a little funny writing things into a book that you couldn't do in the actual world at the time.
I think we feel that way when we see movies now, and it looks like people are so casually hugging, and we're all like,
well, it was really surreal for me, because One of Us Is Next came out in January, and I used 2020 dates a little bit in the future. So it was taking place in like March 2020, April 2020. Like I had the date stamped, and people are hugging and they're sharing food and they're going to baseball games. And it was just weird. Like they lived in a parallel universe, obviously, where none of this was happening.
Yeah, clearly none of that was happening. Okay, here's a what if question. You are a teenager checking your phone for a text. Which flawed character are you most likely to text back or not text back? So think about your characters. Think about who you would respond to for these complicated characters that you would write. Who would you text back when they text you, and who would you ignore? Go ahead, Alyssa.
Oh, well, I guess this is kind of cheesy, but I don't think there's a character I would ignore, even among my very flawed characters. Like I'd be, because the thing is, I kind of love my deeply flawed characters. Like I write occasionally characters who are technically not likable, and I like them very much. So I think I kind of don't know if I believe in the whole idea that there is such a thing as an unlikable character for a writer, at least. A while ago, I had read something, a book that was a memoir written by a therapist, and she said that when she was in school for psychology, one of her mentors told her, "You will always end up loving your patients and caring about your patients, even the ones who are really difficult, because once you see someone's inner life and inner thoughts, you can't help but care about them." And so I kind of think for a writer, that's also true. Like if I'm writing a character who's technically unlikable, but I'm privy to their inner world and inner thoughts, I can't help but like them. Like I know everything about them, and so I know. So it's hard. So I just think I would eagerly text back everyone.
Jen, do you also like all of your characters equally, or are there some that?
I didn't say I like them equally.
Oh, okay.
But I do like
Good point. Good point.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I trust all my characters. I mean, I was listening to Alyssa speak, and I was thinking about how I have, this middle grade series, Fairy Tale Reform School, and Rumpelstiltskin is the big villain in the series. And I just think in general, if you know anything about Rumpelstiltskin, you can't trust him. You can't make any deals with him. So if there was anybody who asked for a favor that I wouldn't text back, it would be him. But I think I'd be afraid to ignore someone like Hades, the god of the underworld, or the Evil Queen. So I feel like I would text back everybody else.
How about you, Karen?
Yeah, it kind of depends on who the character is. Are they, the active types who throw themselves into things and want to know information? I think of like Ellery Corkin and Two Can Keep a Secret. She's going to text back everybody because she wants to know. Whereas the other POV in that book, Malcolm, is just really does not want to be involved in any of this. He might text back Ellery, but that's it. But I think like most of my characters, you can't fully trust them for some reason or another, even the ones that I want you to like, because they've got a stake in whatever's going on and they're not necessarily sharing it. So it kind of depends on what the dynamic is between those characters.
We have a question from our audience. What characters do you like to write more? Evil characters? I guess we say evil, but perhaps we mean complicated, as you've said, Alyssa, or good ones? Alyssa?
Complicated. So I mean, they're fun to write. There's just no question.
How about you, Jen?
Same. Complicated. It's so much fun to write. It's so juicy, and some of these characters say and do things you would never do. So it's a lot of fun to write.
Karen, would you say the same?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say any of my characters are good. Like in the pure sense of the word, they all do things that they shouldn't. I like the saying, I forget who said it, but every villain is the hero of their own story. And that's what I think about when I write these complicated people who are doing things they shouldn't. They have reasons for that, and those might not be moral reasons, or they might not be, socially acceptable reasons, but they have reasons. And that's what I want to bring out and make people, just sort of see that character as a full human.
So there's a question, tell us about your characters. Which one was the most complex or the most difficult to write? Jen, would you like to start us off? Most complex character or most difficult character to write?
I know, I was listening to that and really trying to think of an answer. She's not a villain, Meg in Go the Distance, but Susan A. Egan voiced her, the Broadway legend from the movie. She did the voice of Meg, and she just has this great kind of like sarcastic tone to her voice, and the character is like very detailed, even in the animated movie. And so I was like a little bit nervous about just making sure I got this character who already existed just right in an extension of her story. So I was really anxious about that. I felt like I was constantly rewatching the movie, listening to Meg's lines, just try to get her right.
Alyssa, most difficult to write?
I mean, I think Hannah, my main character in A Day to Yourself and Others, who's a character that is, I think a traditionally unlikable character. So in many ways, she was the most fun I ever had writing someone, but I also think I had to really get to know her. It's a very close. You're just in her head, and there's not much action in the book. She's mostly, for most of the book, she's in a room, mostly by herself, sometimes with one or two other people. And so I think that was the challenge: is how do I make this character compelling such that when there's not actually a lot of action and not much is happening, you are so intrigued by being inside her head that is entertainment enough. So I think that was kind of my favorite challenge.
Karen, how about you?
Yeah, I love to write siblings. That's my favorite thing to write, and especially sisters, because I'm really close to my sister. So when I wrote One of Us is Lying, for example, I had like the Bronwyn Maeve pairing and the Addie Ashton pairing, and like the sisters are close and they support each other and they love each other. And in One of Us is Next, the main character of Phoebe has a really complicated relationship with her sister, Emma. And it lasts for the entirety of the book. Like the literal last page of the book is when something gets resolved between the two of them. And it was really hard because I kept wanting to bring them closer together. Like that went against every instinct I have. It's like, oh, it's not really so bad. They're not really like that mad at each other. And my editor had to keep pushing me and making sure that I didn't sort of succumb to that, because it was really important that they have an almost antagonistic relationship throughout the book.
So I know in some cases you decide the settings of your novels because that's where you live or have lived. In Alyssa's case, there's some California settings and some New York settings. But how do you decide that? When you do research, do you head out to Maine, for example, to see what it's like before you begin to write?
For me, I mean, I've set a few of my books in just my favorite places so that my research is going to Big Sur. So I set 2 books in Big Sur. That's my favorite place, which is just that vacation research. But no, I mean, I think, I've set books in places that I'm not that familiar with. Like I've written books that took place in the Pacific Northwest, which I don't know well, or in the case of Maine, where the Catholic school for couple of girls mostly takes place. That's not a place that I know well the way I know New York and California. So I just, I do research, but it's really, I think it's what feels right out in New York. Like with the 2 stories that I set in Big Sur, Big Sur to me is a place that is wild and kind of a little off kilter, but also deeply endangered thanks to, due to earthquakes and forest fires and redwood burl poaching and things like that. So that atmosphere of that world was a perfect match for my books, R.I.P. Eliza, Why Endanger Yourself and Others, because it's kind of an unstable place. Literally, the ground under your feet is unstable. So I think it's what feels right atmosphere.
Jen, some of your books take place, on the East Coast on the water, or is there a water element for you? Do you do your research near the water?
I do love the water. I love a good beach town. The Belle series takes place in a fictional town, but based on like a Jersey Shore town that I've spent a lot of time in. And I've set some books on the east end of Long Island because my grandparents had a home out there when I was growing up, and I spent a lot of my summers there. I've never said anything on my own hometown. It's very small on Long Island, and I'm always afraid like somebody's going to question some detail or, some store. So sometimes I'll make up a fictional town, but it'll have like characteristics of Long Island or Boston, where I went to college. But then, the fairy tale world I get to make up. So.
And Karen, Gull Island, for example, is off the coast in Massachusetts, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it's fictional, but it's meant to be similar to the islands of Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. It's funny, my first book, One of Us is Lying, I set in California, and obviously the sequel was there too. But my second book was in Vermont. My third book, my fourth book, because the third one was a sequel. My fourth book was an island off the coast of Massachusetts. My fifth book is set in Boston, right near where I live. So I've been joking that my sixth book will just take place in my living room because I'm just getting.
We have a question. Do you like to connect characters to your real world experiences? Alyssa, would you like to start us?
I mean, I definitely have written characters who have experienced things that I've experienced. Like I've written multiple characters who struggle with eating disorders, which is something that I have a history with. I've written, so there's certainly characters who connect with my own life and experience. And I think especially, just going back to what you were saying about setting, like I do like when I do place characters in, in places that I know well. I like kind of connecting with my experience of those places.
The write what you know.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily a write what you know writer, because I think a lot of times what I want to write is the things that I don't know, the things that I want to learn about. But I think, but obviously things that I do know and am familiar with also make their way into my stories too.
Jen, connection to real world experiences. I know fairy tales are made up, but some of the characteristics of those characters are real.
Yeah, I mean, especially when I'm working on a middle grade, I just feel like those themes of friendship, popularity, bullying, just different emotions you have in those middle school years. You think maybe I'm the only one who went through this, and then I see my own kids go through middle school, and I'm like, oh gosh, it brings me right back, and all those emotions come out again. So I have pulled from there when I'm working on a story, and yeah, again, even in the fairy tale world, because all those issues still exist, even in the fairy tale world.
Very true. That's how we develop those characters. Karen, real world experiences, do they inform your writing?
Yes and no. Definitely nothing word for word. But I think, to Jen's points, it's like a lot of feelings, a lot of the universal themes you have of growing up and figuring out your place in the world, and realizing that it might not be what your family wants for you, or that your friends expect from you, and figuring out how you make the big decisions for yourself when you're used to having other people make them for you.
Especially as a teen, and I think in your books, the characters are teens. They're growing out of having their parents making decisions for them and growing into making their own decisions.
Yeah, and experiencing a lot of firsts.
Yes. We have about 4 minutes remaining in the session. Folks, if you have a question, please ask it in the chat now and it'll make its way. One question that's come up is for Karen. It says, what inspired you to write One of Us is Lying?
Oh, I was driving to work and the theme song from The Breakfast Club came on. And I started thinking about that movie and how the theme of bringing people together who seem like they have nothing in common on the surface and forcing them to interact until they realize they have more in common than they thought is still interesting and universal and applicable. And then I thought, but what if one of them died? And that was that was the start.
Where can we find each of you on social media, and which book would you like to pitch to our audience? And we're going to start with Jen. Jen, where can we find you on social media, and which book would you most like to pitch here?
I love Instagram. My kids made me go on TikTok. I'm trying. And you can find me on Twitter as well under Jen Calonita. And then I have like a preview. This is my new cute little Lost Legends series from Disney coming this fall. It's the first book. It's about Flynn. So that's coming next.
Thank you. Are you on YouTube at all, is a question?
No. I mean, I do have some YouTube videos, but I'm not really as active there.
Okay. Alyssa, where can we find you on social media, and which book would you like to talk to us about?
I'm on Instagram at Alyssa Sheinmel. I'm on Twitter, but I don't really tweet. My Twitter account is really just news and updates, so the best kind of way to get in touch with me is Instagram. And my most recent book, which is like right over my shoulder, is the Castle School for Troubled Girls. It came out a couple months ago, and it's loosely inspired by the 12 Dancing Princesses fairy tale. That's always been one of my favorites. It's not a magical book; it's realistic contemporary fiction. But that was kind of the sort of spark for the story was that fairy tale, this idea of 12 girls who are, locked in a castle, and how do they find a way to escape and express themselves despite the rules that are enforced upon them. And it's a book about grief and mental health and friendship. And it's one that I've been working on for a long time, so I'm excited about it.
Thank you. Karen, where can we find you on social media, and which book would you like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter and Instagram at WriterKMC, and I would love it if people checked out The Cousins, which is my latest book. It has been out for just about 6 months now, and it is about a very wealthy, very privileged family with some very dark secrets.
And I just finished listening this morning, so yes, secrets.
Oh, the narrators are great in the audiobook.
They are. They are. I want to thank all of you for joining us today as we met with Alyssa Sheinmel, Jen Calonita, and Karen McManus. I want to thank our authors especially for sharing your time today and sharing a little bit of your writing story. Please take a break now, and then we'll head to your next session at 12 o'clock. Thanks again, everyone.
Bye.